May 8, 1967. 300 mortar and artillery rounds slammed into Con Thien in the space of a few minutes. Then came the sound American Marines dreaded more than anything else on the DMZ. Bangalore torpedoes tearing gaps through the perimeter wire, followed by North Vietnamese sappers carrying flamethrowers. 2 full battalions of the 812th NVA Regiment poured through the breach. The attack fell hardest on Company D, and for close to an hour, the outcome of the fight for Con Thien hung entirely in the balance. Then a relief column arrived from Company A. It brought armored tracked vehicles, a squad of Marines, and 1 M42 Duster, a vehicle originally built to shoot enemy aircraft out of the sky. Now rolling straight into a ground assault, it was never designed to fight. By 0900 hours, the North Vietnamese had withdrawn, leaving 197 of their own dead and 8 captured behind them. The Marines had lost 44 killed. It was not an even trade, and the difference came down to a weapon nobody in 1952 ever imagined firing at infantry. To understand how an anti-aircraft gun became one of the most feared ground weapons of the entire war, we have to go back 15 years to a threat that never actually arrived. Con Thien itself sat almost directly astride the demilitarized zone, separating North and South Vietnam, close enough to North Vietnamese artillery positions that incoming fire was a near-daily occurrence long before the ground assault on May 8th ever began. Marines who served there called it simply the meat grinder of the DMZ, a strip of cratered red earth that had already earned a grim reputation before that pre-dawn attack made it considerably worse. The base existed specifically to observe and interdict North Vietnamese movement across the DMZ, which made it a priority target for exactly the kind of set-piece assault the 812th Regiment attempted that morning: flamethrowers and Bangalore torpedoes, chosen deliberately to punch through wire obstacles fast enough to get 2 full battalions inside the perimeter before Marine defenders could fully organize a response. In 1952, with Soviet jet bombers driving American anti-aircraft doctrine, General Motors began production of the M42, a twin 40mm cannon mounted on a modified M41 light tank chassis. The Army called it the Duster. 2 fully automatic Bofors guns, firing 2 rounds per second each, controlled by a crew of 6, built to fill the sky with airbursts fast enough to shred a low-flying jet before it completed its bomb run. By 1963, the jet age had moved past it. Faster aircraft, longer-range missiles, and radar-guided systems made a visually aimed 40mm gun mount look like a relic of the previous decade. The Army pulled the Duster from frontline service and handed most of the fleet to the National Guard. It looked, for a moment, like the M42's story was already over before Vietnam had even properly begun. Then American combat troops deployed to South Vietnam in 1965, and Army planners, worried about a North Vietnamese air threat that seemed at least plausible on paper, reactivated 3 Duster battalions and shipped them into the war anyway. The air threat never materialized. North Vietnamese aircraft rarely, if ever, challenged American airspace over South Vietnam directly. What the Duster crews found instead was an enemy that moved entirely on the ground, through jungle and rice paddy and fortified bunker lines, an enemy that had never once been the target the M42's designers had in mind. Dusters and their crews adapted within weeks, turned toward the tree line instead of the sky, that same 40mm cannon, rate of fire close to 240 rounds a minute between both barrels, turned out to be one of the single most devastating anti-personnel weapons in the entire American arsenal. The Viet Cong gave the Duster a nickname of their own: Fire Dragon. The high rate of fire and constant stream of tracer rounds gave every burst the visual signature of a dragon's breath pouring across open ground, a nickname earned specifically from the receiving end of the weapon, rather than handed out by the men who crewed it. At Khe Sanh, roughly 8 months after Con Thien, the Duster's reputation only deepened. First Lieutenant Bruce Geiger commanded A Battery, 1st Battalion, 44th Artillery, an air defense unit attached to the 26th Marine Regiment. defending the combat base's airstrip through a 77-day siege by 3 full North Vietnamese divisions. 2 M42A1 Dusters sat positioned at either end of that airstrip. A company of entrenched Marines dug in between them. Geiger told his commanding officer directly, before the siege even began, that his Dusters and the accompanying Quad 50 mounts carried enough combined firepower to break a human wave assault outright, betting the confidence not just on the hardware, but on the specific skill of the crews he'd trained. In March 1968, Duster crews spotted the distinctive pith helmets of North Vietnamese infantry probing the base's perimeter in the open. One Duster alone fired upward of 100 rounds directly into the assembling formation. Everything within 100 meters of the impact zone was annihilated. The entire engagement lasted about 1 minute. The math behind that single minute mattered more than the drama of it. A standard infantry rifle fired 1 aimed round at a time. However fast, a trained soldier could work the trigger and reload. The Duster's twin Bofors cannons fired 240 40mm high-explosive rounds every 60 seconds between them, each one detonating on impact rather than simply passing through a target the way small arms fire did. Massed infantry caught in the open in front of a firing. Duster faced something closer to a moving wall of exploding fragmentation than anything resembling a conventional firefight. North Vietnamese assault doctrine, built around overwhelming a position through sheer weight of numbers before defenders could adequately respond, had no real answer for a weapon that could annihilate an entire assembly area before the assault it was forming forever crossed the wire. The Duster's usefulness in this kind of fight went beyond raw firepower alone. Its high ground clearance, a leftover feature from its anti-aircraft design rather than anything planned for ground combat, made it considerably more resistant to the buried mines that destroyed countless jeeps and trucks along Vietnam's roads. That same mobility let Duster crews reposition rapidly along a threatened perimeter or convoy route, arriving at a breach point faster than towed artillery could ever be repositioned. Convoy commanders specifically requested Duster escort along known ambush corridors for exactly this reason, since a Duster crew that spotted trouble developing along a tree line could bring twin 40mm cannons to bear within seconds, faster than almost anything else in the American ground arsenal at the time. Crews trained specifically for the ground support role the Duster had backed into almost by accident. Gunners learned to read terrain the way an infantry officer would, anticipating likely ambush points and assembly areas, rather than tracking aircraft vectors the way their original training manuals described. That adaptation happened almost entirely in the field, unit by unit, with very little formal doctrine written down anywhere above battalion level, since nobody at Army headquarters had ever planned for an anti-aircraft battalion to become one of the most requested ground support assets in an entire theater of war. None of this came without real cost to the crews operating the vehicle. The Duster's open-topped turret, a deliberate design choice from its anti-aircraft origins that let gunners track fast-moving jets overhead, left the crew almost completely exposed to small arms fire, mortar fragments, and rocket-propelled grenades in a ground war the vehicle's designers had never once considered. On January 24, 1968, a week before the Tet Offensive began, Specialist 4 Ballardo's Duster took part in a convoy rescue outside Dong Ha alongside a pair of M48 Patton tanks. North Vietnamese forces ambushed the column, destroying 1 Duster and 1 Patton outright. Ballardo's own vehicle fought on for most of the day, knocking out several enemy rocket teams with its coaxial machine gun even as its Bofors barrels, recently replaced but never properly degreased, began jamming after hours of sustained fire. He drove out under fire to meet a stranded ammunition truck, resupplied, and returned to the fight rather than withdrawing. Across the 3 Duster battalions that served in Vietnam, combined with the attached Quad 50 and searchlight units working alongside them, more than 200 American fatalities were recorded by the war's end, a cost that fell specifically on crews sitting in an open turret that had never been built to survive ground combat in the first place. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to dig up. The weapon built for a threat that never came, and the war it fought instead. If that's why you're still here, you already know what to do before the next one goes up. Marine commanders at Con Thien and elsewhere along the DMZ came to rely on that speed of response as a specific counter to sapper doctrine. North Vietnamese assault planning depended heavily on breaching a perimeter fast enough that defenders remained disorganized through the critical first minutes after contact. A window sappers trained extensively to exploit. A Duster crew that could reach a breach point and open fire within that same narrow window collapsed the entire premise of the tactic, turning what should have been a chaotic scramble to reorganize into a coordinated kill zone the attacking force had not planned for. That was precisely what happened at Con Thien on the morning of May 8th, when Company A's relief column, Duster included, reached the breach fast enough to catch the 812th Regiment's follow-on, forces still trying to exploit the gap their sappers had opened. The engagement at Con Thien was never treated as an anomaly by the Marines who fought it. After-action reports from similar Firebase defenses throughout 1967 and 1968 repeatedly cited Duster and Quad 50 support as the decisive factor, separating a contained breach from a genuinely overrun position, a pattern consistent enough that Marine and Army commanders alike began requesting the vehicles specifically whenever a firebase sat along a likely avenue of North Vietnamese approach. The reputation built at Con Thien traveled with the units that survived it, informing exactly the kind of confidence Lieutenant Geiger would express to his own commanding officer 8 months later, before the siege of Khe Sanh had even begun. By the time the last Duster battalions deactivated and left Vietnam in December 1971, the M42 had spent 6 years doing a job General Motors engineers in 1952 never sketched into a single blueprint. It had defended bridges, escorted convoys through ambush country, held bunker lines against human wave assaults its own designers would have found almost unimaginable, and earned 2 separate nicknames from 2 separate enemies for 2 very different reasons. The Fire Dragon from Viet Cong guerrillas who watched its tracer stream pour across open ground, and simple, grudging respect from North Vietnamese regulars who learned specifically to avoid daylight movement anywhere near a firebase perimeter, where the distinctive silhouette of twin 40mm barrels might be waiting. Most of the surviving Dusters were handed over to the South Vietnamese Army when American units withdrew. The threat the weapon had been built to counter, Soviet bombers over American skies, never arrived. The threat it actually met, dug into a perimeter at Con Thien at 3 in the morning, arrived instead, and left 197 men behind when it finally understood what it was actually facing. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to dig up. The weapon built for a threat that never came, and the war it fought instead. If that's why you're still here, you already know